The story begins in a remote region of West Africa, where an ancient village lay nestled between rolling hills, dense forests, and a river that shimmered like liquid glass under the morning sun. Life in this village had always moved with the rhythm of the land. People woke with the crowing of roosters, prayed at the ancestral shrine before starting their day, and returned home at dusk to share stories under the pale glow of the moon. For generations, the villagers believed that the living and the dead walk side by side, that every decision, every harvest, and every birth was watched over by the spirits of their ancestors. At the heart of the village stood a sacred shrine, built from red clay and decorated with carved wooden masks representing chiefs and elders who had passed on long before. The shrine was more than a monument. It was the spiritual spine of the community. Here, offerings of kola nuts, millet, palm wine, and carved figurines were placed as tokens of respect. Fires were lit to call the ancestors, and the smoke was believed to carry the villagers' prayers to the invisible realm. During important ceremonies, the shrine's flame would flicker brightly, as if answering from beyond, reminding everyone that the ancestors were listening. The village chief, Chief Kamanu, had once been known as a man of wisdom and fairness. He inherited the leadership role from his father, who had inherited it from generations stretching back into time immemorial. Kamanu's early years as chief were marked by prosperity. The rains came when needed. The harvests were bountiful, and disputes among villagers were resolved with calm authority. He was a leader who respected the traditions of the land, who sought guidance from elders, and who understood that the village's strength came from honoring the spirits who guarded it. But time changes people, even those who seem unshakable. As the years passed, whispers began to circulate among the villagers. Kamanu had become distant, distracted, and restless. He spent less time at the shrine and more time traveling to nearby towns, returning with objects that glimmered with foreign craftsmanship, polished watches, leather shoes, and bottles of golden liquor. Some said he had begun dreaming of power beyond the boundaries of the village. Others believed he was simply tired of carrying the burden of tradition. Yet no one imagined that his restlessness would soon drag the entire village into the shadow of ruin. Despite the chief's growing disconnection, the villagers trusted in the strength of their ancestors. They believed the land they lived on was not theirs to own. It was a sacred inheritance. The soil carried the footprints of their forefathers. The forest held the voices of their elders, and even the river was said to be guided by a guardian spirit. To harm the land or disrespect the shrine was to disrupt the delicate balance that had kept their world alive. Then came the first sign that something was changing. One morning, the sacred flame inside the ancestral shrine flickered weakly, struggling to remain lit despite the absence of wind. The village priest, an elderly man named Ajani, frowned deeply as he watched the strange behavior of the fire. He whispered a prayer under his breath, but the flame responded with a sputter. Spines. Everyone sensed that something was coming, something powerful, something dangerous, something tied to the ancestors themselves. And in the silence of his house, Chief Kamanu sat alone, staring at a sealed envelope lying on his wooden table. Sent from a wealthy foreign company, the letter promised money, influence, and modernization if he would agree to sell a portion of the village land. The land in question, written in bold ink, included the sacred forest and the ancestral shrine. Kamanu looked at the envelope as though it were a living thing. He knew what accepting the offer would mean. He understood the weight of the shrine, the power of the ancestors, and the responsibility of his role. Yet the temptation was strong, stronger than he had expected. Wealth and prestige shimmered in his mind like mirages in a desert. Outside, the ancestors watched in silence, their presence lingering in the rustling leaves and trembling firelight. The village remained unaware that the first cracks in their world had already begun to form. And as Chief Kamanu reached for the envelope, the air grew heavy, as if the spirits themselves were holding their breath. This was the beginning of a betrayal that would change everything. The arrival of the outsider happened quietly, almost too quietly for something that would shake the village's destiny. One afternoon, as the sun hovered low over the forest canopy, a sleek black car rolled along the dusty road leading into the village. Its engine purred like a strange animal never before heard in that region. Children ran after it in wide-eyed wonder, while adults watched with guarded curiosity. Vehicles like this did not simply appear in such places unless something important, usually something dangerous, was happening. From the car stepped a man dressed in a crisp white shirt and polished shoes that reflected the sunlight. His name was Mr. Corbin, a businessman from the capital city, known for buying rural land to build plantations and factories. With him came two assistants carrying briefcases and wearing the confident smiles of men who believed money could move mountains. And perhaps, in many places, it could, but here, in a land protected by ancestral spirits, the cost would be far greater than they imagined. Chief Kamanu greeted the outsider with a forced smile. A part of him felt uneasy about the man's presence, but another part, one long clouded by dreams of wealth, felt drawn to the opportunity. Mr. Corbin wasted no time with niceties. He spoke of development, progress, paved roads, and new houses. He painted pictures of prosperity, so vivid that even Kamanu, a man born and raised among sacred traditions, felt his spirit sway. They met in private inside the chief's house. The windows were closed, and the heavy wooden door shut out the curious eyes of the villagers. Mr. Corbin laid out maps and documents on the table, speaking in a smooth voice that dripped with persuasion. He explained how his company needed a large tract of land, rich soil, easy access to water, and enough space to build a processing facility. On the map, that area included the ancestral forest and the shrine, but he spoke of it as if it were nothing more than vacant territory waiting to be claimed. Kamanu tried to protest, mentioning that the forest was sacred and the shrine untouchable. But Mr. Corbin leaned forward, his voice calm but firm, assuring him that traditions could adapt and that progress always demanded sacrifice. He opened a briefcase filled with money, more than the chief had ever seen in one place. The sight of it made Kamanu's breath quicken. With that money, he could buy influence. The village continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the invisible storm that had just begun to form over their heads. But the spirits knew. The land knew. And before long, everyone would feel the consequences of the choice made in secret. In the days that followed the secret signing of the contract, the village seemed to fall under a strange, uneasy silence. At first, the changes were small, so small that most people brushed them off as natural occurrences. But little by little, the signs grew too strong to ignore. It began with the crops. Farmers who went to their fields before sunrise found their cassava leaves curling as if scorched by fire, even though the sky had been clear and cool throughout the night. Maize stalks that had stood tall the previous week drooped without warning, their golden tassels turning a lifeless gray. Women who fetched water from the river noticed the current moving more slowly than usual, as though something heavy weighted down beneath the invisible figures. Even the village dogs, usually relaxed and loyal, whimpered through the night, staring into the darkness with their fur standing straight up. Mothers held their children close, whispering prayers under their breath, fearful of a presence they could not name. Nighttime changed as well. The moon, once bright and comforting, seemed dimmer, hiding behind mist that had never been there before. Strange winds swept through the village, carrying whispers that made the hairs on people's necks rise. Elders dreamed of shadows with familiar faces, ancestors who appeared with their backs turned, refusing to speak. Some awoke drenched in sweat, convinced that they had been watched. Others saw the shrine in their dreams, its walls cracked, its flame extinguished, its carved masks crying tears of ash. Priest Ajani, troubled by these omens, decided to perform a morning ritual to seek clarity. He lit the sacred drumfire and began to beat the ancestral drum. But something impossible happened. Instead of the deep, resonant sound that usually echoed across the village, the drum produced a hollow, broken thud. It was as if the spirit inside the drum had abandoned it. Ajani froze. Never in his lifetime had the drum failed to call the ancestors. The villagers gathered anxiously, watching the ritual with wide eyes, murmuring prayers. When Ajani tried again, the drum's skin trembled but did not sing. The silence that followed was heavy and frightening. Children soon began falling ill with a strange fever. They complained of hearing distant calls at night and feeling hands touch their shoulders when no one was near. Their fever spiked without warning, and their dreams were filled with visions of forests burning and rivers turning black. As lightning struck a tree near the shrine, splitting it in half, the winds howled like angry spirits, tearing off branches and scattering dry leaves across the village square. People hid inside their homes, trembling as the storm raged with a fury that seemed almost deliberate. When the storm finally passed, the ancestral shrine stood damaged. One of the carved masks had fallen from the wall and shattered on the ground. The sacred flame was completely extinguished, leaving behind a pile of cold ash. Priest Ajani knelt before the shrine, tears welling in his eyes, as he sensed the truth. The ancestors were no longer watching over the village. They had withdrawn their protection. Meanwhile, Chief Kamanu felt the weight of everything more deeply than anyone else would emerge, tearing through the fragile peace like a blade. The breaking point arrived on a morning that began like any other, with roosters crowing and village women sweeping the ground in front of their huts. The air was heavy, but no one expected the moment that would shatter the last bit of illusion and expose the wound beneath their suffering. The sound of machinery echoed from the road leading into the village, engines growling, metal clanking, and voices barking instructions. Villagers dropped what they were doing and hurried toward the entrance in confusion and fear. A line of trucks crawled forward like giant, steel beasts. Behind them came bulldozers, tall survey poles, and men in helmets carrying tools. At the front of the procession stood Mr. Corvin, smiling confidently, as though he were returning to land that belonged to him. The villagers stared, stunned into silence. No one had been told of any project, no meeting had been held, no permission given. Yet the machines moved forward, as if the land lay vacant and waiting. Priest Ajani pushed his way through the crowd, his heart racing with dread. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Mr. Corvin answered calmly, announcing that construction was set to begin on schedule, that the land had been legally purchased, contracts signed, and agreements finalized. His tone was smooth, cold, and absolute. The villagers erupted into confused shouts, insisting that no one had the right to sell their ancestral forest, their shrine, or any part of their heritage. All eyes turned to Chief Kamanu. For a moment, he stood motionless, his face drained of color. The time he had feared was here. His secret, once protected by silence, now pressed tightly against his chest, ready to burst. The villagers approached him with uncertainty, some hopeful that he would deny the claim, others fearful of what his silence meant. Ajani stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Chief, tell us this man speaks lies." Kamanu opened his mouth, but no words came. The weight of guilt choked him. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Women placed hands over their mouths, sensing the truth before it was spoken. An elder, his back bent with age, whispered, "What have you done, Kamanu?" Finally, the chief's voice broke free, but it was weak and hollow. I signed the contract." Gasps erupted like thunder. Some villagers cried out in disbelief. Others collapsed to their knees. Children clung to their mothers, frightened by the sudden explosion of grief and anger. Kamanu tried to explain. He spoke of development, promises of progress, money meant for the village, but his words fell like stones into a deep well, swallowed and forgotten. No explanation could justify what he had done. Priest Ajani demanded to see the contract. With trembling hands, Kamanu retrieved the document from his home and handed it over. The elders gathered around it, reading each line with growing horror. The contract stated clearly that the company had acquired full rights to the land surrounding the forest, including the sacred grove where the shrine stood. It was written plainly, without hesitation or respect. A piece of paper had severed a bond that had endured for centuries. Ajani's face hardened. "You sold our ancestors," he said quietly. The word struck Kamanu like a blow. The villagers repeated it, some shouting, some sobbing. "You sold our ancestors! You sold our protection!" The air grew thick with rage and sorrow. Even the wind felt charged, whipping dust into spirals around their feet. With no other choice, Ajani announced an emergency ritual. If ever the village needed answers from the ancestors, it was now. Villagers followed him to the shrine, moving in a heavy silence broken only by sniffles and anxious whispers. The shrine, still scarred from the storm, seemed almost lifeless. The masks hung crooked, the ashes cold, the air stale. Ajani lit incense, poured libations onto the ground, and struck the drum, hoping desperately for the old sound to return. The drum thudded weakly. He tried again and again and again. The villagers knelt, praying for the ancestors to speak. Then suddenly, the ground beneath the shrine trembled. The air vibrated with a deep, rumbling force. Smoke rose from the ashes, swirling into strange shapes. The wind grew fierce, pushing the villagers to their knees. Children cried, adults clutched each other, and Ajani raised his arms, calling out to the spirits. From within the smoke came a voice, neither male nor female, neither loud nor soft, but felt in the bones. It echoed like thunder rolling through the earth. "The bond has been broken," it declared. "The chief has traded the soul of his people. The land cries. The ancestors turn their faces away." A collective wail rose from the villagers. Kamanu fell to the ground, trembling, tears streaming down his face. He begged for forgiveness, but the voice continued, stern and sorrowful. "Our protection is withdrawn. Until truth is restored, the village will know suffering." The smoke swirled violently, then vanished, leaving behind only silence, a silence deeper and heavier than anyone had ever known. The villagers slowly rose to their feet, shaken to their core. Their world had been uprooted, their spiritual shield shattered. And though the revelation had come through divine intervention, the consequences now lay squarely in human hands. Kamanu stared at the broken shrine, feeling as though the ancestors themselves had turned their backs on him. He had brought ruin to the people he was meant to protect. And the path to redemption, if such a path still existed, would demand more than words, more than tears, and more than any sacrifice he had ever imagined. Night fell over the village with an oppressive heaviness, as though the sky itself mourned the broken bond between the living and the dead. After the ancestor's voice faded from the shrine, and the villagers dispersed in stunned silence, Chief Kamanu remained kneeling on the ground long after everyone had left. His hands trembled, and tears dripped into the dust before him. Guilt clung to him like a shadow that refused to loosen its grip. He could not bear to meet the eyes of his people. He could not even bear to meet his own reflection. The words echoed relentlessly in his mind. You sold our ancestors. No punishment could be harsher. Then, knowing it was true, that night he did not return to his house. Instead, he wandered toward the edge of the forest, drawn by an instinct he didn't fully understand. The forest loomed like a dark wall, thick with ancient trees that had witnessed countless lifetimes. For generations, the villagers had entered this forest only during rituals or sacred ceremonies. But now, with desperation gnawing at him, Kamadu stepped into the shadows alone. He believed, or at least hoped, that somewhere deeper within the forest, the ancestors might still be willing to listen. The deeper he walked, the quieter the world became. The wind no longer rustled the leaves. Insects fell silent. Even the distant sounds of the village faded. His footsteps echoed softly on the forest floor, each one feeling heavier than the last. The branches overhead formed interwoven arches that filtered the moonlight into shifting patterns. Kamanu felt watched, not by eyes of animals, but by something older, something invisible yet present in every whisper of the trees. After walking for what felt like hours, he reached a clearing he had never seen before. At the center stood a large boulder shaped like a mask, its surface worn by centuries of rain and wind. It looked eerily similar to the carved faces inside the shrine. Kamadu knelt before it, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Ancestors, I have failed you," he whispered. "I have failed our people. I allowed greed to blind me. I was foolish, arrogant, unworthy of the trust placed in me. But I beg you, show me what must be done. Punish me, but do not abandon the village." As soon as the words left his mouth, a sharp wind swept through the clearing. The trees groaned, and the ground beneath him pulsed like a living creature. The boulder's surface seemed to shimmer, the carved lines shifting subtly as if awakening. Then, without warning, darkness enveloped his senses. The world around him dissolved, and Kamadu found himself standing in a vast, fog-filled plain. Figures emerged from the mist, tall, solemn, and wearing the masks of ancient chiefs. Their robes brushed the ground like drifting smoke, and their eyes glowed faintly through the carved slits. Kamadu fell to his knees in terror and reverence. These were the ancestral leaders of his lineage, the guardians of the village's soul. One of them stepped forward. Though its face was hidden behind the wooden mask, its voice resonated clearly. "Kamanu, son of a noble line," it said, "you have broken the sacred trust. You traded what was not yours to give. You allowed the land of your ancestors to be claimed by those who neither honor nor understand it." Another spirit approached, its voice gentler but filled with sorrow. "Yet you come here seeking forgiveness. You show remorse, a flame that still survives within you." Kamadu clasped his hands together. "Tell me what to do. I will give up everything. I will tear apart the contract with my own hands. I will restore the land. I will surrender my title, my possessions. Only guide me." The spirits circled him, their movements slow, deliberate, echoing ritual dances performed by living elders. Then the first spirit spoke again. "Forgiveness is not a gift, it is a journey. You must return to the village, speak the truth without fear, and bear the shame that follows. Restore what you have taken. Return every coin, every gift. Break ties with the outsider. Lead your people in a cleansing ritual with sincerity, even if they reject you." Kamadu bowed his head. "I will. But know this," the spirit warned. "Your redemption will not be complete until the village itself chooses to forgive. Some may never do so." Yet you must persevere. The fog thickened, swallowing the spirits one by one until only the echo of their voices remained. Let your actions heal what your choices have wounded. Then the vision faded, and Kamanu found himself once more kneeling in the forest clearing. Exhaustion washed over him, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. He knew what he had to do. At dawn, he walked into the village, his clothes torn and his face streaked with dirt and dried tears. The villagers watched him in silence, their expressions unreadable. Some glared with anger. Others turned away. Kamanu climbed onto the central platform, where chiefs traditionally addressed the people. His voice cracked as he confessed everything, his greed, his weakness, the promises he had been seduced by. He announced that he would return all the money, reject all gifts, and dissolve the agreement with Mr. Corbin. He resigned as chief, declaring himself unworthy of the position. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No chief in generations had ever stepped down voluntarily. Priest Ajani stood beside him, listening carefully. When Kamanu finished speaking, Ajani placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded solemnly. Together, they led the village in a cleansing ritual that lasted from sunrise to sunset. People gathered around the shrine with offerings of palm wine and white cloth. They chanted, danced, and prayed, begging the ancestors to return their protection. Far away, news reached Mr. Corbin that several mysterious accidents had occurred at his. He abandoned the project entirely and left the region without looking back. By the end of the ritual, as the last drop of libation soaked into the earth, a small flame flickered to life in the shrine's hearth. It was weak but steady, a sign that the ancestors had begun to soften. The village was not fully healed. Wounds remained, trust was fragile, and fear lingered. But Kamanu had taken the first steps on the long path toward redemption. Whether the people would ultimately forgive him remained uncertain. Yet for the first time since his betrayal, there was a glimmer of hope, faint but real, like the new flame glowing quietly in the ancestral shrine. In the weeks that followed the cleansing ritual, a calm but fragile peace settled over the village. The flame in the ancestral shrine burned steadily, no longer wavering as it had during the days of turmoil, but neither did it blaze with the vibrant strength it once held. It seemed to mirror the soul of the community itself, still healing, still unsure, but slowly mending. For the villagers, life resumed its rhythm with careful steps, as though everyone was afraid to move too quickly and disturb the delicate balance that had returned. Chief Kamanu, no longer chief, spent his days quietly repairing the damage he had caused. He worked alongside farmers in the fields, carried water with the young men, and helped rebuild homes worn by neglect during the period of unrest. He asked for nothing in return, speaking little, but offering labor wherever it was needed. Some villagers ignored him. Others glared when he passed, but a few offered tentative nods that hinted at the possibility of forgiveness. Kamanu accepted all reactions with humility, knowing that shame was part of his path, and that true redemption depended not on people's words, but on his own perseverance. Priest Ajani kept a close watch on him, not out of mistrust, but out of hope. Ajani understood that for the ancestors, repentance was never a single act, it was a consistent pattern, a transformation proven over time. And in Kamanu, he saw signs that this transformation had begun. The once proud chief who flaunted wealth and authority now moved with the quiet dignity of a man who understood the fragility of power and the cost of losing one's integrity. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of amber and bronze, Ajani approached Kamanu at the riverbank. The former chief was washing clay jars for the upcoming harvest ceremony. His hands, once adorned with Rings and bracelets were bare and stained with earth. "Kamanu," Ajani said gently, "the village council has spoken. They ask if you would be willing to guide the initiation ceremony for the youths this season." Kamanu froze, overwhelmed. "Me?" he whispered. "After everything? They still trust me with such a sacred task?" "Not everyone," Ajani replied honestly. Some protested, but the majority agreed that this responsibility would test your sincerity. The ancestors value truth in action more than apologies in words. Kamanu bowed his head. "I will do it. Not to regain honor, but because it is right." During the initiation ceremony, he taught the youths not only the rituals and customs, but also the story of his own downfall. He spoke openly about the lure of greed and the dangers of forgetting one's duty to the community and the ancestors. The young listened in silence, absorbing the rare humility of a leader who admitted his mistakes. As the ceremony ended, something remarkable happened. A soft wind passed through the shrine, extinguishing the candles for a moment before relighting them with a brighter glow. The priests exchanged knowing looks. The ancestors had spoken, not in booming voices or dramatic signs, but in a gentle blessing. They had accepted the sincerity of the village's healing journey. Later that night, the elders gathered around the shrine. Ajani placed fresh white cloths and palm wine before the sacred masks. The villagers followed, one by one, offering small tributes. Kamanu came last, carrying nothing but a simple bowl of water drawn from the river. He placed it before the shrine and whispered, "May this water cleanse what remains unclean." A warm breeze swirled around him, and for the first time since his betrayal, Kamanu felt the presence of the ancestors, not distant and cold, but watchful, patient. A voice, barely audible yet unmistakably ancient, drifted through his mind. "Walk rightly, and we walk with you." Tears filled his eyes. The ancestors had not abandoned him. In the following months, the village flourished as though nature itself recognized the restored harmony. Rains arrived at the right times, crops grew tall and green, and neighboring communities came seeking the wisdom of Priest Ajani and the humbled former chief who now served as a moral guide rather than a ruler. From this point on, the villagers began to refer to Kamanu not as the man who betrayed the ancestors, but as the one who learned from the spirits. As the story of Kamanu spread, it became a living parable passed down through generations. Elders would recount it to children sitting beneath baobab trees. Dancers would reenact the betrayal and redemption during festivals. Travelers carried the tale across rivers and plains, reminding all who heard it that the bond between the living and the dead was sacred and fragile. And at the heart of the tale lay its enduring lesson, that power without humility leads to ruin, that greed blinds even the wisest, and that a single betrayal can shake the foundations of an entire community. Yet it also taught that forgiveness is possible, not easily, not quickly, but through actions rooted in sincerity, sacrifice, and truth. In the world of traditional African belief, where ancestors watch every step of the living, redemption is never beyond reach for those who seek it with an honest heart. Thus, Kamanu's journey became more than a story. It became a moral compass, guiding them, living, honoring the dead, and reminding all who listen that the greatest offering one can give to the ancestors is not wealth or ritual objects, but a life lived with integrity.